Tonight, we are looking at a story that did not begin on a battlefield. It did not begin with a missile launch or a drone strike or a trench line drawn in the soil of Ukraine. It began in something smaller, much quieter. So quiet, in fact, that the Kremlin hoped no one would notice. It began in towns you've never heard of, and in some cases, towns that may not exist much longer. For centuries, Russian power was built around one foundational assumption: the belief that its human supply was limitless. That no matter how many soldiers were lost in war, no matter how many crises struck the nation, there would always be more men, more peasants, more workers, more boys turned into infantry overnight to fill the ranks. It was this doctrine, more than military innovation or economic strength, that allowed the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union to project itself as a global force. Manpower was Moscow's answer to every problem, but that doctrine is dying. And its collapse is not happening in Moscow or St. Petersburg. It is happening in Russia's forgotten towns, hundreds of them, hollowing out the very reservoir of people the Kremlin once believed could never run dry. And for the first time in modern Russian history, the Kremlin cannot hide the truth. Russia is running out of Russians, the disappearing towns. To understand the scale of what's unfolding, you have to know this number. 1120, that is the number of cities and towns in the Russian Federation. And more than 70% of them, the majority, are what the government classifies as small towns, communities with fewer than 50,000 residents. These towns form the backbone of Russia's cultural identity and, critically, its military recruitment base. But internal reports that the Kremlin tried unsuccessfully to bury show that over the past decade, the population of these towns has dropped by more than 314,000 people. And that's only the part they could not hide. Demographers from Russia's own Academy of National Economy warned that 129 of these towns are at risk of vanishing outright in the coming years, not shrinking, not declining, literally disappearing from the map. That is not just a demographic problem. That is a national security crisis. These small settlements have always provided the majority of soldiers for Russia's wars from Chechnya to Syria to Ukraine. But now the towns that once supplied troops may no longer have people left to send. And if you want to understand why, you need only listen to the young people who are leaving. The exodus of the young in these struggling towns, a single statistic tells the whole story. Only 33% of adults aged 18 to 24 say they are optimistic about Russia's future. That means 67%, nearly 7 in 10, believe their lives will not get better. For a country that depends on its young population for both labor and military power, this is catastrophic. And they're not just pessimistic, they are gone. Gone to Turkey, gone to Kazakhstan, gone to Georgia, gone anywhere they can rebuild a life with more stability than their homeland now provides. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022, between 800,000 and 900,000 Russians have fled. And those are only the numbers analysts can verify. But what matters even more than the count is the composition of those leaving. We've won. February 2022. Immediately after the invasion, journalists, political activists, and tech workers escaped. These were the voices the Kremlin feared most. The thinkers, the communicators, the digital innovators. Wave 2, July 2022. Then came the middle class. Entrepreneurs, educated parents, business owners, wealthy Russians who had options and decided their best option was leaving. More than 15,000 millionaires were projected to flee during this period. This wasn't just an economic loss. It was a vote of no confidence. For Wave 3, September 2022. Then came the breaking point, Putin's partial mobilization. In the first week alone, Kazakhstan recorded 98,000 Russian men crossing its border and millions more tried. This was not ideological dissent. This was fear. This was survival. And today, these waves have formed a river, a steady, ongoing flow of talent and youth out of the country. Turkey now hosts the largest number of Russian long-term residents, with more than 167,000 Russians holding residence permits as of early 2024. Antalya and Istanbul have become hubs of Russian-speaking expat communities. Real estate markets in Turkey were reshaped by Russian money almost overnight. Meanwhile, German cities have absorbed tens of thousands of Russian professionals fleeing political instability. Serbia, Armenia, Israel, and the United States have experienced similar influxes. This is a rerouting of Russia's future out of Russia, a birth rate falling into the abyss. Migration by itself would be a serious problem, but combine it with Russia's new birth rate, you get a demographic freefall. In 2023, Russia's fertility rate hit 1.41 births per woman. Replacement level, the rate needed just to keep population stable, is 2.1. Once a country falls below 1.5, demographers have a term for it: low fertility trap. Very few nations ever escape from it. Russia is sinking deeper into it each year, and the Kremlin knows the optics are fatal. On the 2nd of July 2025, the government quietly removed its demographic dashboard, an online tool showing population trends from public access. This was not data management. This was panic, because the truth hiding behind those spreadsheets was not just about soldiers dying. It was about babies not being born, about maternity wards with empty cribs, about kindergartens consolidating because there are no children to fill classrooms. And no propaganda can explain away the silence of an empty preschool, a workforce running out. With fewer births and mass migration draining the young, Russia's labor force is shrinking at historic speed. Industrial plants, construction companies, and manufacturing hubs are desperate for workers to fill the gap. Moscow now relies on 14 million migrant laborers from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And quietly, very quietly, Russian business leaders proposed bringing in as many as 1 million Indian workers to prevent industrial collapse. The government denied the proposal publicly, but the very fact that it was discussed reveals the magnitude of the crisis. This is not a wartime economy adapting to shortages. This is a country losing the ability to function without foreign labor. And that vulnerability is being felt everywhere, including in Russia's pension system. Retirement raised to 75. In November 2025, a proposal emerged in the State Duma to raise the retirement age to 70 for women and 75 for men. This would make Russia one of the only nations in the world where the retirement age is higher than the average life expectancy, which today stands at 73 years. In poorer regions where life expectancy is even lower, the policy is viewed as institutional cruelty, a guarantee that millions will retire in the grave. Meanwhile, pension delays weeks long in remote regions erode what little trust the elderly still hold in the state they serve for decades. Russia is growing old before it grows prosperous, the worst possible formula for a nation that still imagines itself as an empire. The empire's silent fear. There is another shadow in this story, a shadow the Kremlin will never acknowledge publicly. What happens when tens of thousands of men return from war traumatized, radicalized, and deeply resentful of the country that sent them into a grinder? These men are not coming home to strong communities, functioning cities, or economic opportunity. They are coming back to ghost towns, to dying regions, to a society that has no place for them. As one Russian executive admitted quietly, no one wants trouble with the governor. So we send the least valuable workers to the army. Now the least valued are coming home in large numbers. Historically, this is how revolutions begin, the dragon without a body. When analysts ask whether Russia can hold the Ukrainian territory it captured, the answer is more demographic than military. Counterinsurgency doctrine requires 20 soldiers per 1,000 civilians to maintain control. To occupy all pre-war Ukraine, Russia would need nearly 580,000 troops indefinitely. But Russia's true pool of available young men is only 1.27 million nationwide. And that number is shrinking fast. The empire that once prided itself on infinite manpower is discovering that its dragon has a fire-breathing head but a rapidly disappearing body. The seeds of collapse. Tonight, the story of Russia's demographic emergency is not a story about Ukraine. It's not even a story about war. It is a story about time, about generational loss, about a nation that grew accustomed to surviving catastrophe until catastrophe became internal, silent, and generational. Russia's leaders can hide the spreadsheets. They can outlaw dissent. They can raise the retirement age to impossible heights. They can beg foreign workers to keep factories open. They can forbid talk of demographic decline. But what they cannot do What no government has ever been able to do is command a new generation to appear out of thin air. A country can lose soldiers and still survive. A country can lose workers and adapt. But when a country loses its future, its children, its young, its hope, that is a loss no empire in history has ever recovered from. And that is what is unfolding in Russia right now, quietly, steadily, irrevocably. The Kremlin once believed its population was infinite. It is learning now painfully that its people are finite and they are running